Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and we continue to examine issues which are of public interest and um, what could be more important to Guyanese people than, the question of violence, and especially police violence, because police are there to protect us, and if the police don't protect us, well, who will protect us? And in this case, you may ask yourself the question: who will watch the watchmen if the watchmen are not watching us, or if the watchmen are doing other things? Who will watch over us? That's a big problem for us. This year, 2023, started on a very sour note. Well, worse than sour, a bloody note. An armed policeman walked into a bar in the little hamlet of Huntley in Region 5. And this is on New Year's Day. And two persons were shot dead. Uh, Police violence is a crime. That's what it is. And what we saw on New Year's morning is that there was probably a violation of human rights. Violence, police violence could include abuse, beatings, killings, torture, or the indiscriminate use of riot control agents, tear smoke or rubber bullets during protests. And Guyana has witnessed all of those violations, all of those forms of violence from the Guyana police force over the years. Victims of police violence have been disproportionately, not exclusively, but disproportionately, poor young African Guyanese. For example, Peter Headley was killed while being taken to a police station in May 2021. Quindon Bacchus was killed in Haslington in June last year, year before last, June 2021. Or in Boston, was killed in his bed in Dartmouth Village in in July last in July 2022. Cecil Sampat was killed in Georgetown in July 2020. The police also killed Shemroy Boye, Ivan Lewis, and Ron Somerset in Linden during the protests in July 2012. So police killings have been taking place for a long time. And we must ask ourselves, why do police kill unarmed, poor young people? And um, this is a very difficult question for the police to answer. It seems that police violence could result from corruption. It could result from policemen consorting with criminals, and there's evidence of that. It could result from police influence or interference in the workings of the force, or political influence and interference in the workings of the force, and weak command. Um, there are also factors such as disregarding the standing operating procedures of the force, which have been laid down for decades. Um, it could result from employing excessive force, and this could be the result of policemen who are inadequately trained or incorrectly trained to use force, or even to solve problems or to resolve conflicts. All conflicts don't have to be resolved by force. There's a saying that when the only tool a man has is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And sometimes, if you give a policeman a gun, every problem he faces, perhaps, the first thing he does is go for his weapon. And instead of using suasion, instead of using nonviolent means to resolve the problem, he goes for his gun. And on, not infrequently, sometimes, that results. And then we have to look at the character of policemen. And sometimes the policemen are not adequately trained or educated for their duties as watchmen over the nation. These are factors which have to be taken into consideration. And A lot of people have reported on police violence over the years, and it is not as though it is something that has been ignored. There have been numerous reports. Every year, the United States Department of State, well, the State Department, uh, produces, I think in the month of April, something called the Annual Report on Human Rights Practices. So you can go back over the last decade or longer and see US State Department reports on human rights practices in Guyana. Amnesty International also produced reports, and in one case they stated that police had killed 255 persons in the period between 1997 and 2012. Well, you know very well that is the period of, we call it the Troubles, the period during which President Jagdeo was in charge of the country. Soon after Ms. Jagan died, he took over, and the troubles started. And as the Amnesty International pointed out, during that period, the police killings alone, we're not talking about vigilantes or phantom squads, and death squads, and so on. The police killings alone, according to Amnesty International, 255 persons were killed. These are civilians. Civilians were killed during the troubles. And of course, the actual number is greater than that. This is what Amnesty International reported. It is the deadliest decade of police violence in the history of Guyana. That period under Mr. Barrett Jagdeo. And there are reports, and you can go to the reports. Don't guess, don't listen to propaganda. Go to the report and see the numbers for yourself. The US State Department, in that human rights report that it produces every year, described police abuses during the period 2002 to 2003, just that 1 year period, as a rampage of unlawful killings. This is not the words used by some social media outlet. The U.S. State Department report says that 2002 to 2003 there was a rampage of unlawful killings, and it noted that security forces killed 28 civilians in 2022. That's more than one a fortnight, and 39 civilians in 2003. And it also reported that investigations were rarely conducted into the killings. So it gives the impression that police were killing civilians with impunity. There was no fear of punishment or suspension or trial. And worse yet, the United States Department of State was of the impression that killings were being normalized. They were not only being done with impunity, but they were being normalized. That people came to expect that once the police were in certain situations, somebody will end up dead. This is what happened on the first day of 2023, this year. And it's been going on for a long time. Killings by the police have become normalized, and they've been done with impunity. And this, of course, has demoralized sections of the population. So we must understand that. And according to the United States Department of State, the number of killings could actually be higher, because it is clear that some policemen were being employed to act as vigilante, and they were going out on their own. I'm not suggesting there was any central direction from the police commissioner or police authorities or even the government, but police were going out, maybe on their own accord, or maybe somebody is directing them. I'm not in a position to say. What we do know is that during this time, the Minister of Home Affairs, Mr. Ronald Jairam Gajraj, actually had to be brought before a presidential commission of inquiry to investigate his alleged involvement in managing death squads. So the period of the Troubles is not a period that we could easily ignore or forget. And it was probably the high point of police killings. And as a result of that, criminals were killing police. There is evidence that during that period, about 22 policemen were killed. So if you pass by Eve Leary, you'll see a monument in front of the officers' mess um, to commemorate the amount of policemen who were killed. So it is not a one-sided battle in which policemen were simply killing unarmed civilians. Uh, Civilians were actually shooting back at the police. And luckily, after the APNU AFC coalition entered office, that was brought to a halt. The Troubles came to an abrupt halt because we wouldn't stand for that lawlessness. My friends, uh, even in Guyana, the question of police violence has been the subject of examination. Um, First by the Disciplined Forces Commission and also by the National Commission on Law and Order, which was set up by the government, and the Border and National Security Commission. So commissions were being held, but these commissions produced reports which were being ignored by the PPP administration. That is the problem. And it's not that the matters weren't being investigated, but the reports of the investigations were apparently being ignored. And in particular, there was an engagement, a highly publicized engagement by the administration at that time, Mr. Jagdeo was in charge. And the PPP engaged the United Kingdom government. And between 1998 and about 2010, the UK government generated about 10 consultancies. Consultants actually came down to Guyana and had meetings and produced reports, expert consultants. And at the climax of those consultancies, the United Kingdom government produced a plan and agreed to fund the plan to the value of 4.9 million pounds sterling. You can calculate that in Guyana dollars. And the PPP administration rejected the plan. Can you imagine? A country in the midst of political violence is offered a security sector reform action plan valued at 4.9 million pounds sterling. And I can now remember the head of the presidential secretariat sitting down at the table with the High Commissioner of the United Kingdom signing on the dotted line. And after that was done, some frivolous excuse was created, some pretext, and the plan was abandoned. And that is what has been happening in this country. It's not as though the people were unaware of what needed to be done, but deliberately the solutions were being avoided. And as a result of that, the killings went on. And that security sector reform action plan had not been implemented, but had it been implemented, had it been adopted sincerely and seriously, crime could have been brought under control. But the PPP resorted to some dubious methods, and the killings continued. And because of those methods, as they pointed out, the Minister of Home Affairs had to be brought for the first time in Guyanese history before a commission of inquiry to investigate his involvement in managing those death squads. And of course, after that, he was exonerated. And I must mention that he was exonerated by the commission, chaired by the now deceased former acting Chief Justice Chang. And he was made High Commissioner to New Delhi. New Delhi seems to be a place to be posted to as High Commissioner. My friends, the question is one of regulation. Are the regulations and laws adequate? Yes. There's no doubt that the laws to protect the civil population, to prevent public disorder, do exist. And in particular, the police have their own regulations called Standing Orders number 18. This governs the standing operating procedures. The number 18, you can check the police rules, and they have very carefully crafted prescription for the use of firearms and the use of force. SO 18, I can't go through all of the provisions. You can read it for yourselves in the public domain, not a secret. It prohibits the use of force by policemen, except in very specific circumstances. For example, if the policeman is actually attacked by an assailant or by a person, and there's no other way of protecting himself, protecting his life, than by using his firearm. That is accepted by law, but as you know, very frequently, the victims were unarmed, as in the case of Boston or Bacchus. The victims were unarmed. And there are other cases, of course, in which, police feel that fire has to be open. But even so, fire does not have to be lethal. And for example, in dispersing an unruly assembly, there are several stages which have to be embarked upon before lethal fire is used. For example, a warning must be given. The commander of the police detachment said, "This is an illegal assembly. Go to your homes. Disperse or we fire." I remember in the early days after independence, the banners actually had them in Hindi and English. So the officer in charge had to display a banner. He had to use a bullhorn or a loudhailer so that everybody could hear, "Go to your homes, disperse or we fire." So the question of shooting unarmed civilians, even if they're protesting, is one that is carefully regulated by law. And very often, police open fire without warning. And this is what caused death, for example, at Linden in 2012. And even so, even if they have to open fire, police must not use more force than is necessary. They must not resort to excessive force. Even if one person is shot, there's no reason why 2 or 3 persons should be shot, as happened again in Linden. So force does not mean lethal fire. It could mean use of baton, it could mean use of tear smoke, and it should not go on longer than necessary. That is, sometimes one person being shot would be enough to convince the other protesters, even if they were disorderly, to disperse. That is what the police should aim at doing, saving lives, not taking lives. The police do have regulations, and there are laws in Ghana, for example, in addition to their own standing orders, complaints about the use of excessive force could be made too. The Police Complaints Authority, that's a legal body under the chairmanship of a retired judge of the High Court. And the PCA is a resort that citizens could use, of course, after the event. In addition to that, the police have their own OPR. My understanding, this is the Office of Professional Responsibility. My understanding is that the office is part of the commissioner's office. So the officer there, obeys instructions. obeys instructions, and he's not empowered to embark on his own investigations. He's told what to investigate. And of course, the reports are sent to the commissioner. I once had the privilege of seeing such a report. There was a case of the torture of a young person in the West Demerara. And the report that was released was far different from the report that was written. A lot of passages were redacted. So the public never got an idea, although the young man was able to go to court and receive some bit of compensation. But the Office of Professional Responsibility is basically a department of the police. It's a case of the police investigating themselves. So the outcome is quite predictable in most cases. And then, of course, there's the Police Service Commission. And as you know, they have some powers, and in some cases, policemen could actually be demoted or maybe disciplined in other ways, dismissed from the force, or whatever means are available to the Police Service Commission. And finally, there's the Ombudsman. Again, the Ombudsman has been in existence, since soon after independence. And you can have a situation in which the Ombudsman could receive the reports, but again, this has been going on for decades, and very frequently the Ombudsman does not have the executive power to order this. They can make recommendations. But that's about it. So these four agencies do exist: the Police Complaints Authority, the Office of Professional Responsibility, the Police Service Commission, the Ombudsman. My friends, the police came face to face with armed criminals during the Troubles. That is roughly the first decade or so of this century. And the killings were on both sides. And I would say that a lot of what happened, a lot of the lawlessness, was caused by the influence of notorious narco-traffickers in the police force, and the willing participation of a few unprincipled policemen, serving policemen. Police inability to curtail violent crime led to the emergence of phantom death squads. And I believe that the head of the Presidential Secretariat at the time was responsible for coining that expression, phantom squads. And he referred to the Troubles as drug gang warfare. Many people thought it was some outbreak of ethnic conflict. It wasn't ethnic at all. It concerned narcotics. You can go back to the records and see the head of the Presidential Secretary said, what is taking place is drug gang warfare. And you cannot write the history of the Troubles without writing of the role of narco-trafficking. And those death squads, exposed the complicity between rogue policemen and narco-traffickers. That is the problem. And unless you deal with the narcotics problem, you won't deal with the gun problem and the violence problem. And narco-traffickers and the business of narco-trafficking is so lucrative that many weak policemen, not many, some weak policemen could be coerced or persuaded to break the law. And this is what happened during the Troubles. Where do we go from here? What is the way forward? Police violence is not normal. What happened in the early 2000s under President Jagdo was abnormal. And as a result of that, many young people were killed. And there's a lot of bitterness in the country. And that bitterness has resurged over the last 2 years. And people have taken note. And many victims or their families feel that they cannot get justice because they've never gotten justice from the days of the 1990s with the shooting of Germain, justice for Germain. And people have records of the amount of people killed by the police. So we need to curb police violence, and we need to consider the implementation of serious, what I would call root and branch reform. You have to look at the causes. And the causes are not weather change, the causes are not ethnic differences. The causes are, in the tolerant attitude of the administration to police violence. The causes are in narco-trafficking. And if we do not deal with narco-trafficking, if we do not deal with gun running, if we do not deal with the interference with the police, we'll never overcome this problem of police violence. That is why my administration in 2015 reapproached the British government and restarted the security sector reform plan. So when the PPP administration entered office in August 2020, there was a security sector reform action plan. Security experts came from Britain, and they were in the process of implementing these reforms. And I don't want to say everything went back to square one, but the reform was halted. There's no reform taking place in the police force. And it is my view, you may not agree with my view, but unless the police force is reformed root and branch, and sometimes, as people say, fish rots from its head, and you have to look at all levels of the police force, not just the constables, the subordinate officers, the gazetted officers. All levels of the police force have to be examined to ensure that they comply with the law. And this question of police violence is brought to an end once and for all. Well, the reports are on the table. The reports dealing with narcotics control strategy are there. Reports from the United States State Department are there. And it's quite clear that there is a high level of connivance and a high level of tolerance for violence and police killings. Who suffers? The Guyanese children, young people are the ones who suffer most and who suffer first. And if you feel that police violence could be curbed by other means, it is an illusion. It is an illusion to feel that the culture of police violence could be eradicated the way things are going on at present. The police force should be the nation's watchmen. But who will watch the watchmen? That is the problem facing Guyanese people today. How will the police force be reformed? How will the police force be made to protect the people of Guyana? If they are our watchmen, who will watch the watchmen? Thank you, and may God bless you and keep your sons safe from police violence.
Let us cooperate for the young. Let us cooperate for our land. Let us resolve to fight together.